The air inside the derelict satellite city was stale and tinged with the faint aroma of rust and regret. Rian Voss, self-proclaimed Zen-archaeologist and full-time cynic, tried not to breathe too deeply. He'd been exploring abandoned chunks of floating metal for longer than he'd care to admit, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that nothing good ever happened in a place that smelled like this. "Looks like a junkyard for rich people," muttered Quint, Rian's tech specialist, as he followed behind. His boots clanked noisily against the metal floor, echoing down the empty corridors. "You sure there's anything worth finding here, boss?" Rian smirked. "The universe's most crucial question. Is there anything worth finding in any of us?" He paused to flick at a dangling cable, watching it swing like a pendulum of apathy. "I mean, sure, we're here for ancient alien tech and all, but I'm just hoping for air conditioning that doesn't sound like it's coughing up a lung." The team of four stumbled through the dimly lit corridors, their flashlights cutting through the gloom like reluctant scalpels. There was Rian, Quint, Maeve the engineer, whose optimism was as rare as a full tank of fuel, and Elia, a linguist whose sarcasm could peel paint. "Why do these places always have to be so damn creepy?" Maeve whispered, her voice barely above a whimper. "It's not creepy," Rian assured her, flicking his light across walls adorned with alien graffiti. "It's atmospheric, like a horror movie without the plot or the budget for special effects." Elia chuckled, her voice a low rumble. "It's not the place that's creepy, Maeve. It's the company." "Touché," Maeve conceded, adjusting her tool belt nervously. "So, what are we really looking for here, besides the usual mold and disappointment?" "Records say this city was part of a long-dead alien civilization," Rian replied, stopping to examine a panel that had certainly seen better centuries. "Rumor has it they had tech way ahead of their time. Stuff that could make a microchip blush, and probably explode," Quint added helpfully. "That too," Rian agreed, giving the panel a nudge with his boot. It fell off, revealing a mess of wires and circuits that looked like someone had tried to build a supercomputer out of spaghetti. "Ah, the cutting-edge technology of the ancient galaxy. Think it'll still work?" Maeve asked, trying to sound hopeful. "I think it has about as much chance as a snowball on Solara Prime," Rian replied, yanking at a wire. "But hey, we're the ones sticking our fingers into the light sockets of history, right?" They pressed on, deeper into the belly of the satellite city. The corridors began to open up into larger chambers, each filled with relics of the past. Statues of beings with too many limbs, ornate carvings that told stories no one could read. It was like a museum without a curator. "All these artifacts," Elia mused, scanning the ornate carvings with a handheld translator. "Each one a testament to a civilization that probably spent its last days arguing about who left the toilet seat up." "Some things never change," Rian said, his eyes catching on a pedestal that seemed to call for attention. "Looks like they left us a gift." Sitting on the pedestal was a small device, a sort of alien Rubik's Cube with a bad attitude. Rian picked it up, feeling the hum of energy beneath its surface. It was cold, heavy, and somehow full of promise. "Dare you to solve it," Quint teased, peering over Rian's shoulder. "You first," Rian shot back, turning the cube over in his hands. "Can't be any worse than the time you tried to fix the food replicator." "Hey, that was an accident," Quint protested. "How was I supposed to know it would start spitting out purple goo?" "I warned you," Maeve reminded him with a grin. "Never trust a machine that promises unlimited snacks." They laughed, the sound echoing off the walls in a way that almost made the place feel alive again. But then the laughter faded, and the silence returned, heavier than before. "So what do we do with this thing?" Elia asked, nodding at the cube. "We take it back to the colony," Rian decided, tucking the device into his pack. "See if it can tell us anything about who these aliens were, and maybe why they left this floating hunk of rock behind. Or if it'll help us fix the damn air conditioning," Quint muttered. "Priorities, boss." They turned back, retracing their steps through the labyrinth of metal and shadows. The city was waking up behind them, monitors flickering to life, cameras swiveling in their sockets. Ever get the feeling we're being watched? Maeve asked, glancing nervously at a camera that seemed to be tracking their every move. Always, Rian replied, not slowing his pace. But I'd be more worried if we weren't. They reached the docking bay just as their shuttle powered up, the familiar whine of its engines a welcome sound. Rian took one last look at the satellite city, its secrets still shrouded in darkness. Whatever mysteries lay within, they would have to wait. As they boarded the shuttle, Rian couldn't shake the feeling that the real question wasn't about the aliens or their technology. It was about the human colony, and whether they were truly as alone in the universe as they'd like to believe. Home sweet surveillance, Elia said, settling into her seat. Let's just hope they've fixed the coffee machine, Rian replied, buckling in. Because I've got a feeling we're going to need it. The shuttle lifted off, the derelict city shrinking away beneath them. But as they soared through the void, heading back to the human colony that floated like a stubborn bubble in the vast cosmic ocean, Rian couldn't shake the sense that they were being watched. And not just by the cameras. It was hard to say what was more unsettling, the ancient alien tech he just pocketed or the thought that somewhere someone, or something, was already aware of what they'd found. Well, Rian said, as the stars whipped past the viewport, if nothing else this job keeps us on our toes. And occasionally our asses, Quint quipped, earning a snort from Maeve. Right, Rian agreed. Let's get back and see what's for dinner besides recycled air and existential dread. The shuttle's autopilot hummed a tuneless song, guiding them back to the colony with all the enthusiasm of a cat dragged to a bath. As they approached, the sprawling sea of prefab structures and hastily cobbled-together habitats came into view. Home, Maeve said, with a sigh somewhere between exasperation and affection. Or at least the closest thing to it. If you squint, it almost looks cozy, Elia added, glancing at the rows of identical buildings. More like a giant shoebox, Rian said, checking the readouts on the control panel. And we're the mismatched socks. They landed with a thud that suggested the shuttle's suspension was as tired as its passengers. The boarding ramp lowered, and the stale, recycled air of the colony hit them like a lukewarm breeze. Ah, nothing like that artificial atmosphere, Quint said, taking a deep breath. Smells like home, right? Smells like my last date, Maeve retorted, stepping onto the tarmac. They made their way through the colony, their path illuminated by flickering lights that seemed to be waging a personal war against the encroaching darkness. Do you ever wonder why we bother with this place? Elia asked, gesturing at the rundown buildings. Not often, Rian replied. But when I do, it's usually because I've run out of whiskey. They reached the central hub, where the colony's control center loomed like a particularly unimpressive monument to human perseverance. Inside, the air was cooler, the hum of machinery a constant background noise. Rian placed the alien cube on the main console, where it sat like an unexploded bomb. You think it'll do anything? Maeve asked, eyeing it warily. I think it already has, Rian said, glancing at the monitors that lined the walls. Each one flickered with data streams, images of the colony, the surrounding space, and something else. Boss, Quint said, pointing at a screen that displayed a series of readings. You might want to take a look at this. Rian leaned in, squinting at the numbers that danced across the screen. They weren't from the colony's systems, they were coming from outside. Looks like we've got company, Rian said, his voice low. Elia laughed, though there was no humor in it. Great. My social calendar was looking a bit empty. So what's the plan? Maeve asked, looking to Rian for guidance. Same as always, Rian replied, staring out into the vastness of space. We figure it out as we go, hope for the best, and expect the worst. He turned away from the screen, the shadows of the past and the uncertainties of the present mingling in the dim light of the control room. And maybe, Rian added with a wry smile, we'll even survive long enough to complain about it later. As the colony's alarms began to blare, announcing the arrival of whatever was lurking beyond, Rian couldn't help but chuckle. Because in the end, wasn't that what humanity was best at? Facing the unknown with a grin and a muttered curse, knowing full well that the universe never played fair. "Buckle up, folks," he said, as the monitors flashed red. "Looks like it's going to be one hell of a ride." The control room hummed with the kind of energy that usually preceded a major systems failure or a catastrophic explosion. Rian preferred the former, mostly because it didn't involve fire and screaming. Quint was hunched over the console, poking at the ancient alien Rubik's Cube with the determination of a man trying to fix a flat with a banana. "Any luck?" Rian asked, leaning against the console like he had all the time in the universe. "If by luck you mean it's not actively trying to kill us yet, then yes," Quint said, his fingers dancing over the cube. "But give it time. Great." "So it's basically like my last girlfriend," Rian muttered, earning a snort from Elia, who was balancing a cup of the colony's best sludge, mistakenly referred to as coffee, on the console's edge. "Can we speed this up?" Maeve asked, glancing nervously at the monitors that blinked with warnings of incoming ships. "I've got a date with the airlock if things get too spicy. Promises, promises," Elia quipped, taking a sip of her coffee. "But first, let's see what our new friend has to say." As if on cue, the cube emitted a low hum that crescendoed into a light show worthy of a rave. Symbols flared across the console, and the room's lighting flickered like a disco caught in an existential crisis. "Is that supposed to happen?" Maeve asked, backing away slowly. "Only if we're trying to summon something," Elia replied dryly. "Perfect. Just what we need, a ghost from an alien past," Rian said, squinting at the symbols. "Or worse, an accountant." The room suddenly plunged into darkness, the kind that wrapped around you like a cold, calculating embrace. The monitors died and the emergency lights flickered to life, casting a sickly, yellow glow over everything. "Just what I wanted," Quint muttered. "A blackout. Right up there with dental surgery in zero-G. Let's hope this is just a power hiccup," Rian said, clapping his hands to push back the cold. "And not the universe telling us to get the hell out. Because we're so good at listening to those little hints," Elia added, voice dripping with sarcasm. They stumbled through the control room, flashlights in hand, a motley crew of cosmic misfits. The corridors were eerily silent, save for the distant wail of alarms that seemed more bored than panicked, as if even they had given up on warning the colony inhabitants. "Anyone else feel like we're walking into a bad horror movie?" Maeve asked, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "Yeah, but at least we're not the dumb teenagers," Rian said. "We're the dumb adults." They reached the main junction, where the colony's heart would have been, if it hadn't been ripped out and replaced with a series of tubes that made less sense than a cat in a spacesuit. "Okay, here we are," Rian announced, though the lack of enthusiasm was palpable. "Let's see if we can kickstart this heat before things get ugly." "You mean uglier," Quint corrected, shining his light on the tangled mess of wires and circuits that looked suspiciously like spaghetti someone had tried to cook with a blowtorch. As they searched for the right sequence of switches and levers that might restore power, the whispers started. At first, they thought it was just the wind, a feat considering there wasn't any wind in space. But the whispers grew like a creepy ASMR channel designed by someone with a taste for the macabre. "Anyone else hear that?" Maeve asked, her voice more tentative than usual. "Voices," Elia said, trying to sound blasé. "Yeah, I think we've officially crossed into the twilight zone." "Fantastic," Rian said, thumping a control panel with his fist. "Now we get to add mad ramblings to our list of concerns." The whispers coalesced into something more coherent, if not comforting. Cryptic messages floated through the air, promising doom, gloom, and various other synonyms for "we're screwed." "The stars will fall," one voice said, sounding like an old record being played backwards. "All will be consumed," another added, with the kind of dramatic flair that would have made a high school theater director proud. "Someone's been watching too many bad holodramas," Quint said, trying to mask his unease with humor. "Or we've really pissed off the wrong cosmic entity," Rian added. Again, they worked in silence, the kind that was only broken by the occasional muttered curse or the clang of metal against metal. Maeve's hands were a blur, her engineering instincts taking over as she tried to coax life back into the dead systems. "Almost there," she muttered, though even she didn't sound convinced. As if to mock their efforts, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Threats and promises mingled in an otherworldly chorus that set the hair on the back of Rian's neck on edge. "Okay, I'm officially creeped out," Elia said, her bravado slipping. "And I don't creep easy, tell me about it," Quint said. "If I die, I better come back as something cooler than this, like a sentient AI with a god complex." Maeve suggested, wiping sweat from her brow. "Or a space pirate," Quint said, grinning despite the gloom. "Focus, people," Rian said, glancing around the darkened corridor. "We've got bigger problems than post-mortem career choices." Finally, with a triumphant shout, Maeve managed to reroute the power. The lights flickered back to life, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mock their previous fear. "Power restored," Maeve said with an air of satisfaction. "Great," Rian said. "Now all we have to worry about are those ships." "Right," Elia said, her voice dry. "And the fact that we're apparently not alone." They returned to the control room where the monitors flashed with warnings of incoming vessels. The data was clear. Whatever they'd awoken, it was coming, and it wasn't in a friendly mood. "So, what do we know about our guests?" Rian asked, gesturing to the screens. "Not much," Quint said, "except they are big, fast, and probably not here to sell us cookies." "Damn," Maeve said. "I was really hoping for cookies." They watched as the ships drew nearer, dark shapes against the backdrop of stars. There was something ominous about them, something that suggested they were more than just a passing threat. "I think it's time we called in some favors," Rian said, rubbing the back of his neck. "See if we can find out what the hell's going on." "Who's going to answer?" Elia asked. "Most people don't even pick up their tab, let alone a distress call." "Then let's hope someone's feeling generous," Rian said, fingers flying over the console as he sent out a desperate signal into the void. As the minutes ticked by, they could do nothing but wait, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional crackle of static from the comms. "You know," Maeve said, breaking the tension, "I almost miss the whispers." "Careful what you wish for," Elia replied. "They might come back, and this time they'll bring friends." Eventually, a response came through, crackling and distorted but unmistakable. Help was on the way, though what form it would take was anyone's guess. "Let's hope they get here before things get really interesting," Quint said, the nervousness in his voice barely masked by sarcasm. "Define interesting," Rian said, eyeing the monitors where the alien ships loomed ever closer. "Interesting as in we're about to be the main course at an intergalactic buffet." "Interesting," Quint replied. "Great," Maeve said. "And I didn't even bring a damn side dish." The room fell silent again, each of them lost in their own thoughts as they prepared for whatever was coming. The colony was vulnerable, a sitting duck in the vastness of space, and they were the ones tasked with keeping it afloat. "Buckle up," Rian said, echoing his earlier words. "It's going to be a long night." And as the alien ships closed in, bringing with them the promise of danger and uncertainty, they knew one thing for sure: nothing good ever happened in a place that smelled like rust and regret. But then again, if they'd wanted easy, they'd have chosen a different path a long time ago. The whispers might have faded, but the tension hung in the air like a storm, waiting to break. They could only hope they were ready for it. The lights flickered back to life, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The kind of light that made even the tiniest speck of dust look like a planet in its own right. Rian squinted at the control panel, hoping that if he stared hard enough it might transform into something remotely optimistic. No such luck. "Well, what do you know?" "It's still a giant pile of crap," Elia muttered, taking another sip of her coffee, the kind of sludge that doubled as a weapon in more civilized parts of the galaxy. "That's the spirit," Rian said, sarcastic enough to make an entire room full of pessimists proud. "Keep that morale up." As they began working through the tangled mess of alien tech and human jury-rigging, Rian noticed something odd: a series of strange symbols etched into the metal of the console. They looked vaguely familiar, like a bad déjà vu you couldn't quite place. "Hey, Quint," Rian called, waving the Rubik's Cube enthusiast over. "Take a look at this. Doesn't it look a bit like that toy you've been fiddling with?" Quint peered at the symbols, eyes narrowing as if the answer might just leap out and give him a friendly slap on the face. "Looks like the same script, same ancient gibberish. Maybe they had a thing for puzzles, or they really hated people trying to solve them," Maeve chimed in, poking at the console with the kind of cautious curiosity usually reserved for carnivorous plants. "Great. So we're stuck in a room built by the galaxy's most annoying escape room designers," Rian said, scratching his head. "I swear if I find out they left us a little room with a key under the mat, I'm gonna lose it," Elia snorted. "Wouldn't be the first time. Remember that time on Theta 9? When everything was just a decoy for that hidden vault?" "Ah, Theta 9, Rian mused, a nostalgic twinge in his voice. "Good times. I think I still have the scar. That's the spirit," Maeve said, rolling her eyes. "Scarred but not dead." Yet, outside, the universe continued its indifferent spin, and Rian couldn't help but feel like an ant trying to negotiate rent with a boot. The ships were drawing closer, and the only welcoming committee they had was a bunch of disgruntled engineers and one very confused xenorchaeologist. "Okay, let's try something," Rian said, tapping a series of buttons with the kind of confidence that only comes from having no idea what you're doing. The console beeped in response, lights flashing in a sequence that was either promising or deeply foreboding, like a smile from a crocodile. "Maybe this place was built as a distraction," Quint suggested, still frowning at the symbols. "Make everyone think it's important while hiding something much bigger." "Well, if it's a distraction, it's doing a damn good job," Rian said, "distracting me from the fact that we're about to have company." With a jolt, the monitors flickered back to life, displaying not just the approaching ships but something else. A series of red dots moving rapidly through the wreckage of the colony. Drones, and not the friendly, pizza-delivering kind. "Those don't look friendly," Maeve observed, understatement dripping from her words. "No kidding. Why can't we ever get attacked by something nice, like a hostile ice cream truck?" Elia remarked, her sarcasm as thick as the coffee. The drones buzzed through the air, maneuvering with the ease of creatures that had been waiting for a very long time, like predators finally released from a cage. "Looks like they've been activated," Quint said, watching them with an expression that was half awe, half "oh crap." "I bet they have a welcoming committee of their own," Rian said, tapping his fingers against the console. "Time to see if we can turn this mess of wires into something less suicidal." Maeve hunched over the console, fingers flying as she tried to hack into the drone systems. "Good thing I took that crash course on alien tech. Let's hope it wasn't a waste of credits." "Do your thing, Maeve," Rian said. "We'll keep an eye on the approaching doom." Elia chuckled, though it was more of a dry wheeze. "If this is what it's like to work on ancient defenses, I think I'll stick to my day job." "What's that?" Rian asked, not really expecting an answer. "Not dying, mostly," Elia replied, peering at the monitors. The drones moved with eerie precision, zigzagging through the wreckage as they approached the colony. Rian felt a shiver run through him, not fear exactly, but the kind of anticipation that comes when you know the universe is about to throw you another curveball. Maeve cursed, her face lit by the console's glow. "I'm in, but it's a mess." These systems are older than Rian's sense of humor. "Hey," Rian protested, though he knew it was true. "My humor's like fine wine. Ages well. If by that you mean it turns into vinegar, then sure," Quint said, turning his attention back to the cube, which was now humming quietly, lights blinking in a sequence that seemed almost intentional. "Anything from our little puzzle?" Rian asked, nodding to the cube. "Nothing yet," Quint said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I swear it's like it's trying to tell me something." "Yeah," Rian said. "Probably stop poking me." Outside, one of the drones broke formation, heading straight for the control room like it had a personal vendetta. Rian's heart skipped a beat. "We've got company." The drone zeroed in, a sleek metallic menace against the backdrop of the stars. It hovered outside the viewport, its myriad sensors staring them down with all the warmth of a tax audit. "What's it doing?" Elia asked, squinting at the thing. "Judging us, probably," Rian said. "And I bet we're coming up short." Before anyone could say more, the drone's sensors flared, and a beam of light shot out, scanning the room with the thoroughness of a particularly nosy neighbor. "Oh great, now we're on intergalactic candid camera," Maeve muttered, still wrestling with the console. The drone didn't move, just hovered there, its presence a silent threat. Rian wondered if it was debating whether to blast them into oblivion or just let them stew in their own panic. "We need to get control of these things," Maeve said, her tone grim. "Before they decide we're not worth the trouble working on it," Rian said, though he had no idea what he was doing. A little belief never hurt anyone who wasn't about to die. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness, the air in the control room growing thicker with tension. Every beep from the console felt like a countdown to their imminent demise. Finally, Maeve let out a triumphant shout. "Got it. I think I've managed to disable their weapons." "Good," Rian said, relief flooding through him. "Now let's hope they don't have a backup plan. You know, like turning into murder bots." As if in response, the drone outside the viewport powered down its sensors, drifting back to join its companions in their strange patrol. "Guess they're not ready to kill us yet," Elia said, her voice a mix of relief and sarcasm. "Always nice to be not worth the effort," Rian said. For now. With the immediate threat averted, they turned their attention back to the console, trying to decipher the ancient symbols that seemed to hold the key to everything. "Looks like this place was built to be a diversion," Rian said, tracing a finger over the script. "A decoy to protect something bigger, so somewhere out there is what?" "The real prize?" Maeve asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Seems that way," Quint said, glancing at his cube. "And if these symbols match, it might be the key to finding it." "Great," Elia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So we're chasing ghosts and a treasure map written by someone with a grudge against clarity." The thought hung in the air, unspoken but understood. They were caught in the same web that had snared countless others before them. A game of cat and mouse where the rules were as inscrutable as the players. "All right," Rian said, determination creeping into his voice. "Let's figure this out before our friends outside decide to say hello again." As they worked, the tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by the kind of focus that only comes when you're too busy to be scared. The threat of the drones hung over them like a dark cloud, but for now, it was just that, a threat. "Okay, I think I've got something," Maeve said, excitement sparking in her eyes. "There's a sequence here that matches the cube. If we can activate it, we might be able to find out what's really going on." "Good," Rian said. "Let's solve this puzzle and hope it doesn't solve us first." With a shared nod, they set to work, piecing together the clues left behind by a civilization that had vanished long before their time. The symbols slowly began to make sense, a map leading them deeper into the mystery that surrounded the colony. As they worked, the universe outside continued its indifferent march, the alien ships drawing ever closer. But for the moment, at least, they were safe in the knowledge that they were one step closer to uncovering the truth. And as the minutes turned into hours, Rian couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they might actually have a chance. Sure, the odds were against them, the universe was indifferent, and the drones were only temporarily pacified. But they were resourceful, stubborn, and just crazy enough to think they could pull it off. In other words, they were human, and sometimes that was enough. Rian Voss sat hunched over the console like a gambler stuck on a losing streak, trying to bluff the universe with a pair of twos. The control room hummed with energy, or maybe it was just vibrating with the tension of a situation rapidly spiraling into a cosmic joke at their expense. Either way, Rian needed a plan, and fast. The massive derelict satellite city they were in wasn't just a hunk of scrap metal, it was a trap, and the drones outside were about to spring it. "All right," Rian said, tapping a sequence on the console with the confidence of a man who learned his tech skills from a cereal box. We've got to warn the colony leaders that they are sitting on a decoy that's about to blow up in their faces. Try sending a message, Maeve suggested, her eyes glued to the flickering screens. You know, before those drones decide to redecorate with us. Rian grunted, attempting to patch through communication channels. And let's hope it's not like last time when my message ended up as intergalactic spam mail. Hey, if you're lucky, maybe they'll think it's a new dating service. Quint chimed in, still fiddling with the alien Rubik's Cube like it held the meaning of life, or at least a decent distraction from impending doom. Rian just snorted. Dear colony leader, are you tired of your boring planetary defenses? Spice up your life with an alien invasion today, but their attempts at gallows humor were just that, humor. The console stubbornly refused to send any messages, displaying one error after another like a particularly malicious slideshow. Great, Elia muttered, sipping her coffee like it was the nectar of the gods. We're stuck in a tin can of death and can't even phone home. Rian slammed a fist into the console in frustration. Communications jammed. Looks like someone or something doesn't want us ringing the alarm bells. That's just peachy, Maeve said, typing furiously as she tried to override the jamming signal. And what's next? The drones get bored and start a knitting club, more like they'll activate more of the city's ancient defenses, Rian replied, his voice tinged with a mix of resignation and irritation. Because nothing says welcome to your new home like a surprise death trap. Outside, the drones buzzed and whirred, a mechanical swarm with more intent than Rian liked. As if on cue, the whole structure shuddered, ancient systems awakening with a groan that echoed like the universe itself was clearing its throat. Rian, Quint said, eyes wide as he pointed to the screens. I think the drones just invited some friends to the party. Rian leaned closer to the monitors, which flared with an ominous red glow. More dots appeared, and not the friendly kind that might offer you cookies and a smile. Instead, they were spread throughout the satellite city, flaring to life like a bad case of space acne. Fantastic, Rian muttered. We've got company and they're all packing heat, Elia sighed, setting her coffee aside. If I survive this, I swear I'm going to retire somewhere nice and quiet. Preferably where nothing tries to kill me every other Tuesday. But where's the fun in that? Maeve shot back, fingers still dancing over the controls. You'd miss the adrenaline rush, yeah, and I'd miss out on a lovely case of heart failure too, Elia quipped. The good news, Rian said, injecting a false cheeriness into his voice that bordered on manic, is that we're stuck in the middle of a giant, ancient alien death maze. Great pep talk, boss, Quint deadpanned. I feel better already. The drones, now accompanied by their newly awakened compatriots, buzzed with a renewed sense of menace. They began working in tandem, activating various systems across the satellite. Rian could practically see the gears turning in their metallic heads as they prepared to unleash hell. Maeve, any luck on that override? Rian asked, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. Still working on it, she replied, the console's glow reflecting off her determined expression. But these codes are ancient. They're not exactly user-friendly. Well, keep at it, Rian urged. We need to figure out what these defenses do before they decide to play Space Invaders with us as the targets. No pressure, right? Maeve muttered. Pressure. Elia echoed. I thought we were just here for a nice sightseeing tour. Rian chuckled despite himself, exchanging a glance with Elia. Yeah, next time, let's go somewhere with a beach. Outside, the swarm of drones darted through the corridors of the derelict city, their presence a constant reminder of the sword dangling over their heads. Rian felt the weight of it pressing down, each passing second a reminder of just how precarious their situation was. All right, Rian said, trying to rally the group. Let's assume nothing good is going to happen unless we make it happen. An inspiring speech, Quint remarked, smirking. Really brings a tear to the eye. Rian ignored the jab, focusing on the console. If they could just find a way to take control of the city's systems, they might stand a chance. But as it stood, they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Got it, Maeve exclaimed suddenly, her face breaking into a triumphant grin. I've managed to access some of the city's systems. We might be able to shut down the drones or at least slow them down. Then do it, Rian said, his voice firm. We need every advantage we can get. With a few deft keystrokes, Maeve set to work, her fingers a blur as she navigated through the labyrinthine code. The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension palpable as they waited for something, anything, to happen. And then, as if by magic, the screens flickered, showing the drone's erratic movements slowing, some even powering down completely. A collective sigh of relief swept through the control room, the first genuine moment of hope they'd had since arriving. Well, that's something, Elia murmured, picking up her coffee again like it was a talisman against the chaos. Good job, Maeve. Yeah, nice work, Rian agreed, feeling a spark of optimism. Let's keep it up. We might just get out of this in one piece. Famous last words, Quint said, but there was a hint of admiration in his tone as he looked at Maeve. Now we just need to figure out how to get a message out, Maeve said, her mind already racing with possibilities. If we can find the source of the jamming signal, we might be able to disable it. Then let's do it, Rian said, determination etched into his features. We're not going down without a fight. Moving with a renewed sense of purpose, the team worked to trace the jamming signal, poring over maps and schematics like detectives piecing together a crime scene. It was slow going, the ancient tech stubborn in its refusal to give up its secrets. But Rian had dealt with worse, and he wasn't about to let a few stubborn bits of code stand in his way. Not when the stakes were this high. Here, Maeve said, pointing to a section of the map that glowed with an eerie light. I think this is where the signal's originating from, right in the belly of the beast, Rian muttered, eyeing the location with a mixture of dread and determination. Of course it is. Think of it as a challenge, Quint suggested, ever the optimist. Or, a death wish. Yeah, because nothing screams fun like running into the jaws of certain doom, Rian replied, shaking his head. But we don't have a choice. Let's move. The team set off through the labyrinthine corridors of the derelict city, their footsteps echoing like whispers in the silence. The place felt alive, a slumbering giant that threatened to wake and crush them at any moment. Feels like we're walking into a trap, Elia said, her voice low. Probably because we are, Maeve replied, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They moved cautiously, every creak and groan of the ancient structure setting their nerves on edge. The path wound deeper into the city's heart, each turn a reminder of just how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? Quint asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Only by everything that wants to kill us, Rian replied, a grim smile on his face. So the usual. The corridor finally opened into a vast chamber, the center dominated by a massive console that pulsed with an unsettling glow. It was there, they knew, that the jamming signal was being broadcast, a sentinel standing guard over a secret it refused to share. Great, Maeve said, eyeing the console like it was a cobra about to strike. Let's see if we can shut this thing down. As they approached, the room seemed to come alive, lights flickering and systems humming with a malevolence that set Rian's teeth on edge. The drones, still patrolling outside their immediate vicinity, were a reminder that they were not alone. Okay, Rian said, voice steady. Let's make this quick. Maeve set to work, her fingers flying over the console with a practiced ease. Rian watched, every sense alert for any sign of danger. They were close, so close to gaining the upper hand. But as always, the universe had other plans. Without warning, the chamber shook violently, as if the city itself was protesting their intrusion. Rian staggered, catching himself on the console as debris rained down from above. Now what? Elia shouted, her voice barely audible over the din. The defenses. Maeve shouted back. They're activating, Rian cursed, glancing at the screens. The drones outside had resumed their patrols, moving with renewed purpose. In the distance, something larger stirred, a sentinel of ancient design awakening from its slumber. Just once I'd like things to go according to plan, Rian muttered, already knowing it was a futile wish. With the city's defenses coming online, they were out of time. Rian's mind raced as he weighed their options, each one more desperate than the last. Maeve, can you finish the override? He asked, urgency clear in his tone. I'm trying, she replied, her voice tense, but these systems are fighting me every step of the way. Rian gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of their predicament pressing down on him. They were so close to shutting down the signal, so close to warning the colony leaders. But the city's ancient defenses were a formidable foe, and they were running out of options. We need to hold them off, Rian said, determination hardening his voice. Quint, Elia, get ready. Ready for what? Quint asked, but he was already checking his gear, a resigned acceptance in his eyes. Whatever comes through that door, Elia replied, her tone as dry as the Mojave, because it's bound to be bad news. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, the tension in the air thicker than the dust that coated the chamber. Outside the drone's mast, a mechanical army poised to strike. Almost there, Maeve said, her focus absolute. Just a little longer. Rian nodded, his attention on the entrance. They could do this. They had to do this. The survival of the colony depended on it. And then, with a final keystroke, Maeve let out a triumphant cry. Got it. The signal's down, but before they could celebrate, the chamber trembled once more, a low rumble that promised disaster. Rian's heart sank as he realized what it meant. The city's defenses were preparing for one final assault. Brace yourselves, he shouted as the walls trembled with the force of an impending storm. In that moment, it was clear. They would have to fight for their lives, against a city determined to keep its secrets buried, against a threat that refused to be silenced. But Rian had been up against worse odds before, and if there was one thing he knew, it was that humans had a knack for surviving the impossible. The walls of the derelict satellite city shook like an ancient beast stirring in its grave, each tremor a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. The chamber around Rian and his ragtag crew groaned, lights flickering like the city was having a seizure. It wasn't hard to see why the place had been abandoned. It had all the charm of a haunted junkyard. So, anyone got a plan that doesn't end with us as space debris? Rian asked, trying to keep his voice light as he tightened his grip on his makeshift blaster. How about we try not to die? Quint suggested, his fingers twitching around the alien Rubik's Cube he'd been tinkering with since they arrived. The damn thing seemed to glow brighter every time the city convulsed, like it knew something they didn't. Call it Plan A. Very original, Elia muttered, nursing her coffee like it was a lifeline. But I'd rather have Plan B lined up, just in case. Plan B involves screaming and running. Maeve piped up from where she was hunched over the console, her fingers dancing over the keys as she fought to keep them from being overwhelmed. You know, like usual. That's more like it, Rian said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Everyone loves a good scream. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with the scent of burnt electronics and desperation. Outside, the drones buzzed like angry hornets, itching to sting anything that moved. Rian couldn't help but feel they were the main course on today's menu. These defenses are ancient, Maeve said, frustration etched across her face as she struggled with the console. Built by a civilization that clearly had trust issues. Trust issues. Try paranoia with a side of homicidal tendencies, Quint quipped. No wonder they didn't leave a forwarding address. Rian snorted, but the humor was short-lived. The reality was they were stuck on this rust bucket of a city with no easy exit. Their only hope lay in disabling the jamming signal and contacting the colony before the drones turned them into a modern art installation. Look, Maeve, can we at least delay the drones? Maybe give them something else to shoot at? Rian asked, trying to keep the anxiety from creeping into his voice. I can try, Maeve replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. But this system is more stubborn than a mule with a migraine. Great, 'cause that's exactly what we need right now, Elia said, her sarcasm cutting through the tension like a blunt knife. Rian caught her eye, shared a wry smile. Even at the end of the universe, some things never changed. Suddenly, a klaxon blared, the sound ricocheting off the metal walls with enough force to rattle their teeth. Rian turned to see the chamber's entrance begin to seal shut, massive doors grinding into place with the finality of a guillotine. "Anyone else getting a bad feeling about this?" Quint asked, clutching the Rubik's Cube like it was his only friend in the world. "Just your average day at the office," Rian replied, his mind racing. "Maeve, we need those doors open. We can't afford to get trapped in here." "I'm working on it," Maeve snapped, her fingers a blur over the console. "But this system is about as cooperative as a rock." "Try hitting it harder," Elia suggested, her voice dry as a desert. "Works on most things." Maeve rolled her eyes but gave the console a solid whack for good measure. Rian didn't know if it was her expert touch or sheer dumb luck, but the doors halted their ominous descent, the klaxon fading into a disgruntled whine. "Nice move," Rian said, flashing Maeve a thumbs up. "Next time maybe we should just kick it to death." "Noted," Maeve replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Let's see if we can keep this going." Rian nodded, scanning the room for any sign of imminent danger. For the moment, they seemed to be in the eye of the storm, but he knew it wouldn't last. The city's defenses were relentless, and they were only one system glitch away from being obliterated. "Okay, let's regroup," Rian said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Maeve, keep working on delaying the drones. Quint, see if that cube of yours can do anything useful. Elia, keep an eye on the sensors. We need to know if anything bigger than a toaster is headed our way." "Roger that," Elia said, setting aside her coffee with a resigned sigh. "Guess it's time to earn our hazard pay." "Wait, we're getting paid?" Quint asked, eyes wide with faux innocence. "If we survive this, I'll buy you dinner," Rian promised, though he doubted they'd find anything that qualified as a decent meal this side of the galaxy. "Deal," Quint replied, flashing a grin. "But I'm expecting dessert too." As the team set to work, Rian took a moment to assess their options. They were limited, to say the least. The satellite city was one giant trap, and they were the flies caught in its web. But if there was one thing Rian knew, it was that humans were stubborn creatures. They'd find a way out, even if it killed them. "All right," Rian said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the city around them. "Let's get this done. We didn't come all this way to be a footnote in some alien history book. Their situation might be dire, but they weren't out of the fight. Not yet. As long as they had breath in their bodies and the will to survive, they had a chance. And sometimes a chance was all you needed." The chamber shuddered again, a fresh wave of tremors rippling through the ancient structure. Rian braced himself against the console, cursing the day he ever set foot on this cursed hunk of metal. But there was no turning back now. They were in the thick of it, and the only way out was through. "Maeve, any progress?" Rian asked, his eyes fixed on the screens that flickered with alien symbols and cryptic data. "Depends on your definition of progress," Maeve replied, not looking up from her work. "I might be able to reroute some of the city's power, give us a temporary advantage, but it's like playing chess with a sledgehammer." "Sounds promising," Quint said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Just make sure we don't end up as the pawns." "Trust me, I'm doing my best," Maeve shot back, her tone as sharp as a blade. Rian watched the two of them, felt a swell of appreciation. They might be outmatched and outgunned, but they had heart, and sometimes that was enough to tip the scales. "All right, team," Rian said, drawing their attention. "Let's make this count. We've got one shot to get this message out and warn the colony. If we screw this up, we're toast." "No pressure," Elia said, rolling her eyes. "Just another day in paradise, right?" "Exactly," Rian agreed, his grin as sharp as ever. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Together they turned their focus back to the task at hand. The odds were against them, but they'd faced worse. They were human, after all, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds. The city's defenses might be ancient, its systems archaic, but Rian and his crew were determined. They'd find a way to break through the jamming signal, reach the colony, and give them the warning they desperately needed. And if they had to tear the city apart to do it, So be it. The room shook once more, lights flickering as the city seemed to draw a ragged breath, but Rian wasn't intimidated. The city might be a decaying relic, but it had one fatal flaw. It underestimated the tenacity of those who dared to challenge it. "Hold on to your hats, folks," Rian said, a wild glint in his eyes. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." With a final, determined nod, he turned back to the console, ready to face whatever came next. The city might be a death trap, but Rian and his crew were anything but easy prey. They'd fight to the last breath, defy the odds, and prove once again that when it came to survival, humans were a force to be reckoned with. It was time to show this ancient relic what they were made of. Time to remind the universe that you could kick a human down, but you'd never keep them out. Rian grinned at his team, felt the energy in the room shift. They might be outmatched, outgunned, and out of their depth, but they were in this together. And together, they'd find a way to survive, because that's what humans did best. "Let's get to work," Rian said, his voice carrying over the hum of the city. "We've got a message to send and a world to save." And with that, they dove back into the fray, ready to face whatever came next with grit, determination, and just a dash of gallows humor. After all, if they couldn't laugh in the face of certain doom, what was the point? As the team worked tirelessly, the chamber's oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten just a fraction. They were making progress, slowly but surely. The hum of the alien tech around them became a backdrop to their efforts, a testament to their resolve. "Maeve, how's it looking?" Rian asked, glancing at the flickering screens that lined the console. "Better than I expected," Maeve replied, her voice laced with cautious optimism. "I've managed to reroute some power, give us a bit more breathing room." "Good," Rian said, feeling a spark of hope. "We might just make it out of here in one piece after all." "Don't jinx it," Elia warned, her eyes never leaving the sensors. "We've still got a long way to go." "Right," Rian agreed, his grin undeterred. "But let's keep our fingers crossed. Can't hurt, right?" As they pressed on, Rian felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were close, so close to achieving what they'd come here to do. The city's defenses might be formidable, but they were nothing compared to the spirit of those who dared to challenge them. The chamber shuddered again, a fresh wave of tremors rippling through the ancient structure. But Rian and his team were undeterred. They were ready for whatever came next, prepared to face the challenges head-on. Because in the end, it wasn't the strength of the enemy that mattered. It was the strength of the heart. And in that, they had no equal. Rian didn't know who designed the satellite city's control systems, but they had clearly been the kind of person who enjoyed making other people's lives miserable. Or maybe they had a fetish for chaos. Either way, it was like trying to play the piano while blindfolded and drunk, except the piano was on fire and occasionally exploded. At least, that's how Maeve described it as she furiously tapped away at the console. "Guys," Quint piped up, still fixated on his alien Rubik's Cube like it was the Holy Grail. "I think I found something. A hidden control center." Maeve's head snapped up. "Please tell me it's not another death trap." "Only one way to find out," Rian said, pointing toward a dimly lit corridor branching off from the main chamber. "Maeve, Quint, you're with me. Elia, keep an eye on the main console. Let us know if anything starts glowing or hissing." "Always wanted to be a canary in a coal mine," Elia muttered, taking another swig of her increasingly lukewarm coffee, the lifeblood of her existence. As they ventured into the corridor, Rian couldn't help but notice how every step echoed like a judge's gavel in an empty courtroom. It was enough to make anyone jumpy, and he preferred to save his nerves for more genuine opportunities to panic, like when they ran out of coffee. Quint led the way with the cube emitting a faint glow, like a particularly confused flashlight. "I think it's this way," he said, half talking to the cube and half to the team. The corridor opened into a room that was a symphony of chaos. Panels and screens flickered in and out of life, casting erratic shadows that danced like drunken ghosts. In the center was a control panel so complex it looked as if it had been designed by a committee of paranoid schizophrenics. Maeve's eyes lit up in a way that suggested she saw things differently. If we can disable the jamming signal from here, we might be able to redirect some of the city's defenses. But first, we need to figure out what all this does. Great, Rian said, clapping his hands together. Let's start by not pressing the big red button. I think we can all agree that's a universal do not touch sign. Quinn approached the control panel like it was a temperamental cat. I think we might need to use the cube. There's a slot here that looks like it fits. Or it's a slot for a bomb, Maeve pointed out, skepticism dripping from her words. Only one way to find out, Rian said, mentally adding potential explosion to his list of imminent hazards. With a reluctant nod from Maeve, Quint inserted the cube into the slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a series of lights blinked into existence, moving in patterns too complex for the human eye to follow. It was like watching a fireworks display that had a nervous breakdown. That's promising, Maeve said dryly, her fingers dancing over the console. I'm accessing a schematic of the city's defenses. Looks like we can reroute power to disable some sections, including the jamming signal. Slowly, though, Quint warned. We don't want the system to notice us fiddling with its guts. Right, Rian said, feeling the weight of the moment. Maeve, you're the expert here. Quint, keep an eye on that cube. If it starts singing or something, pull it out. The team settled into a rhythm, working with a precision that only desperation could sharpen. The room buzzed with a tension that felt like it was one bad decision away from boiling over. Not that Rian cared to think about it. He was too busy watching the screens for any sign they'd been detected. Rian, I've got some good news and some bad news, Maeve said, her eyes glued to the shifting maps. Good news, we're making progress. Bad news, we might have triggered an alert. Drones are mobilizing. Never a dull moment, Rian sighed. Elia, how's it looking back there? Elia's voice crackled over the comms, laced with caffeine-fueled sarcasm. You know, just the usual impending doom, existential dread. Oh, and drones, lots of drones. Can you buy us some time? Rian asked, knowing the only currency she had was whatever luck remained in their rapidly emptying bank. I'll see what I can do, Elia replied, her voice a steady constant amid the chaos. Time became a slippery beast, one they were trying to wrestle into submission. With every keystroke and every twist of the cube, the team edged closer to their goal. The city's defenses were a labyrinth of old-world paranoia, but Maeve was a master of the maze. Okay, Maeve said, her voice tight with focus. I think I've got a path. If we can just... A panel exploded to their left, showering them in sparks and filling the room with the acrid stench of burnt electronics. Rian ducked, heart hammering like a prisoner trying to tunnel out with a spoon. What the hell was that? Quint yelped, pulling the cube free on reflex. Pressure valve blew, Maeve shouted over the hiss of escaping gas. Old system, remember. More like a system with a death wish, Rian muttered, wiping soot from his face. Everyone all right? A chorus of affirmatives came back, though Elia's response carried a hint of mania. Just peachy here, but we might need to move on the next part of the plan sooner rather than later. What's that supposed to mean? Rian asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew. Drones are closing in, Elia reported, her voice calm despite the urgency. We either finish this or we find a way to disappear. Rian looked at Maeve, who met his gaze with a mix of determination and something that might have been fear if she were anyone else. Can we finish this? We don't have a choice, she replied, her hands moving like a concert pianist's over the console. Just keep those drones off us for a few more minutes. Quint, you're with me, Rian said, moving to the entrance of the control room. Let's see if we can play decoy and give Maeve the time she needs. They slipped back into the corridor, every clank of their boots sounding like a countdown to chaos. The drones were close, their mechanical hum vibrating through the walls, a swarm of metal locusts descending on an already blighted field. Got a plan? Quint asked, weapon in hand, though his grip on the Rubik's Cube was tighter. Not a great one, Rian admitted, scanning their surroundings. We just need to delay them. Make some noise, draw them away from Maeve. You're sure this is gonna work? Quint's voice carried the skepticism of someone who'd seen every plan go belly up at the worst possible moment. "Nope," Rian replied cheerfully, peeking around the corner. "But if it doesn't, we won't have to worry about it for long." The hum of drones grew louder, and Rian could see their silhouettes flitting past the corridor's mouth like sinister shadows. He hefted his makeshift blaster, feeling the reassuring weight of it in his hands. "All right," Rian said, taking a breath that tasted of rust and regret. "Let's give them something to shoot at." With that, he stepped into the open, aiming the blaster and firing off a few shots that ricocheted off walls with a satisfying clatter. The drones responded immediately, sharp movements heralding a barrage of return fire that barely missed turning Rian into a very dead leader. "Back!" Rian shouted, diving behind a corner as Quint followed, both of them grinning like idiots who'd just cheated death. For a few tense minutes, they played a cat-and-mouse game with the drones, using every bit of cover and ingenuity they had to stay one step ahead. Rian could almost imagine they were back in the academy, running simulations that never seemed to factor in the sheer terror of being outgunned and outnumbered. "What's Maeve's ETA on the miracle?" Quint asked, breath coming in ragged gasps as they huddled behind a support beam. Rian checked his comms, hoping for good news. "Maeve, how's it going in there?" "Almost there," Maeve replied, sounding more composed than Rian felt. "I just need another minute. Keep them busy." "Piece of cake," Rian said, though the quiver in his voice made it clear the cake was made of cyanide. Another barrage of fire from the drones sent shrapnel flying, and Rian ducked instinctively. It was only a matter of time before their luck ran out, and he could hear the clock ticking in the back of his mind like a judge counting down to a death sentence. "Ready for another run?" Rian asked Quint, who nodded despite the sweat dripping down his face. They sprinted from their hiding place, blasters firing wildly in a bid to draw the drones' attention. It was a strategy born of desperation, but it was all they had. A sharp voice crackled in Rian's ear, Maeve's triumphant declaration cutting through the chaos. "Got it, the jamming signal's down. We can send the message." "Do it," Rian shouted, firing another burst of shots to cover their retreat. The drones faltered, confused by the sudden shift in their electronic landscape. Back at the control room, Maeve was a blur as she worked the console, tapping commands that would send a warning to the colony. The city might have been a death trap, but they'd found its Achilles heel, and they were going to shove a metaphorical spear right into it. The drones hesitated, their systems struggling to adapt to the changes as Maeve's handiwork took effect. Rian and Quint used the distraction to make a break for the control room, hearts pounding in their chests like war drums. "We did it," Rian said, breathless and grinning as they rejoined Maeve. "Now let's get the hell out of here before the city decides to cancel our lease." Elia's voice came over the comms, carrying the note of a much-needed lifeline. "Message sent. We're clear for now, but we need to move before they regroup." Rian nodded, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "You heard the woman. Let's make tracks." The team gathered themselves, the weight of what they'd accomplished hanging in the air like a dense fog. They'd come too far to fail now, and while the path ahead was fraught with peril, they'd face it together. Because in this grim universe, camaraderie was the only thing that could light the way through the darkness. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to survive it all. The flickering lights of the control room reminded Rian of a disco designed by someone with a grudge against rhythm. Sparks danced occasionally, teasing the idea of a fire hazard, but never quite reaching the commitment level required for actual combustion. You had to respect the restraint, in a way. "Disable the ancient defenses," Rian said, as if it were as simple as ordering takeout from a greasy space diner. "How hard can it be?" "You've said that before," Quint replied, juggling a makeshift blaster and the alien Rubik's Cube like he was at some kind of masochistic talent show. "Remember how that ended?" "Oh, how could I forget? It ended with us not dying." "Pretty sweet deal in my book." Rian stepped over to the console. Maeve was a maestro at, though instead of playing a symphony, she was orchestrating the world's most precarious game of Jenga. Rian, Maeve said, not looking up from her work, if you don't have the first clue how to disable ancient defenses, feel free to shut up and let me work. I'm this close to getting us out of here. Sure, sure. I'll be the picture of silence and compliance, Rian said, leaning over her shoulder anyway, his curiosity outweighing any sense of personal safety. Just tell me when I can stop worrying about getting fried by a laser turret. You might want to keep worrying, she said, eyes darting over the array of incomprehensible symbols and glowing buttons. I'm reading this like a drunk trying to decipher hieroglyphics. Rian chuckled, but the sound came out more like a wheeze. He'd never been one for faith, but he had faith in one thing. If they didn't disable the defenses, the colony would be toast. And not the nice, crispy kind you slather with butter and jam. How about those drones? Elia piped in through the comms, her tone like someone who'd just been told their favorite TV show got canceled. They're still swarming around like angry bees who've had their hive poked. We need to deal with the defenses first, Rian replied, though he knew she already understood. Then we can swat those drones out of the sky. Well, do it fast, Rian. I hear drones aren't big on second chances. Quint, fiddling with his glowing puzzle, spoke up. I think I can use this cube to overload their circuits. Give me a second. Take two, Rian said, but not three. We're on a tight schedule. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made your spine itch and your teeth clench. Maeve's fingers flew across the console, tapping out commands that might as well have been spells for all Rian understood them. Meanwhile, Quint was fiddling with his cube like it was the most complicated fidget spinner known to man. Got it, Maeve suddenly exclaimed, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence like a knife. Defenses are down, or at least the ones that matter. Great, Rian said, relief settling in his chest like an overdue rent check. Now how about those drones, Quint? Quint twisted the cube with a flourish, and it emitted a burst of light and sound that could only be described as the universe's most extravagant sneeze. Outside the control room, the drones faltered mid-flight, their circuits confused and overwhelmed by the unexpected signal. Drones are down, Elia confirmed, her voice carrying a note of surprise. Whatever you did, it worked. Piece of cake, Quint said, though Rian could see the sweat beading on his forehead. Now, what's this about the true purpose of this floating death trap? Rian leaned back against the console, feeling a smirk tug at his lips. Turns out this satellite city was never meant to be a city at all. It's a decoy. A decoy, Maeve echoed, disbelief coloring her words. For what? That's the million-credit question, isn't it? Rian replied. Seems the ancient civilization that built this place was paranoid, go figure. They designed it to look like a treasure trove when really, it's just a giant distraction. And we fell for it, Quint said, the realization settling over him like a particularly itchy sweater. I'd say we're in good company, Rian said, gesturing to the chaos around them. Seems to have worked on just about everyone. But there's got to be something else, something real that they were hiding. Could be on Theta 9, Maeve suggested. The vault might be there. It fits with everything we know or thought we knew. Then we need to get there before anyone else does, Rian said, feeling the urgency like a second heartbeat. We might have bought ourselves some time, but that won't last. Elia chimed in through the comms, her voice carrying a note of camaraderie. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Plan's simple, Rian said, though he knew simple plans had a way of spiraling into chaos. We get off this heap, make our way to Theta 9, and find out what these ancients thought was worth hiding. Sounds like a relaxing vacation, Quint said, sarcasm thick enough to cut with a knife. Pack your sunscreen, Maeve added, her own brand of wry humor shining through. I hear Theta 9's got a killer UV index. With the defenses down and the drones disabled, their exit was surprisingly uneventful, save for the occasional creak and groan of the city's infrastructure, as if it were complaining about the rude awakening they'd given it. They moved with purpose, boots clanking against metal floors, eyes scanning for any sign that their temporary reprieve was coming to an end. "Anyone else feel like we've been through the ringer?" Quint asked, still clutching the alien cube like a security blanket. "Just you," Rian replied, though his own body ached in places he'd forgotten could ache. "Everyone else is fresh as daisies." "If daisies were haunted and had trust issues," Maeve added, cracking a rare smile. The corridors of the satellite city felt like they were closing in, each step echoing with the ghosts of those who'd come before and failed to leave. Rian pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had one chance to get this right, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. Elia, waiting at the ship, greeted them with a mock salute. "Welcome back. How was your stay at the worst hotel in the galaxy? Could have used more amenities," Rian said, climbing aboard with a sigh. "And less chance of sudden death." "At least the room service was prompt," Maeve quipped, settling into her seat. "All right, folks," Rian said, sliding into the pilot's chair and flicking switches with practiced ease. "Let's get out of here before we overstay our welcome. Theta 9 awaits." The ship hummed to life with the comforting purr of a well-oiled machine, and Rian navigated it away from the derelict city, guiding them into the vastness of space. The satellite faded into the distance, a forgotten relic of a time when paranoia ruled and secrets were buried under layers of deception. As they flew, Rian allowed himself a moment of reflection, the enormity of their task looming like a shadow over the cockpit. They were chasing a ghost, a whisper of truth hidden beneath the lies of an ancient civilization. But if they succeeded, they'd uncover something no one else had, real answers in a universe full of questions. "So, what do you think we'll find?" Quint asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "Probably more questions," Rian replied, though he couldn't deny the thrill at the thought of uncovering the truth. "But maybe, just maybe, we'll find something worth all this trouble." "Hope it's something good," Maeve said, her voice soft yet firm. "I'd hate to think we went through all this for another empty vault." Rian nodded, feeling the weight of their journey press down on him like the planet's gravity well. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Because in this universe, the only thing more terrifying than the unknown is facing it alone." They fell into silence, the hum of the ship and the twinkling stars around them the only soundtrack to their thoughts. Each member of the crew knew what they were risking, but those risks were worth it for a chance at the truth. As Rian steered the ship towards Theta 9, a sense of determination settled in his bones. They'd come too far to falter now. The galaxy was vast, but together, they'd carve out their place within it, unearthing secrets and defying expectations. After all, human ingenuity had always been their greatest weapon, and Rian had every intention of wielding it to its fullest. They were more than just a crew. They were a family, bound by their shared struggles and triumphs. And no matter what lay ahead, they'd face it head-on, with a smile on their lips and a quip ready on their tongues. The ship's grav engines whirred as they descended onto Theta 9, a planet that looked about as inviting as a tax audit. The place was nothing but barren rock and suspiciously shifting sands, the kind of terrain that screamed "trap" louder than a carnival barker on payday. Yet here they were, chasing the ghost of an ancient civilization that apparently had a flair for the dramatic. As Rian guided their craft toward what the maps optimistically referred to as land, his mind was a jumble of concerns. Mostly about how much of their remaining fuel would evaporate in the planet's atmosphere, and a little bit about how they were basically walking into a scenario that had bad idea written all over it. "So what's the plan again?" Quint asked, still fiddling with his alien Rubik's Cube like it held the answers to life, the universe, and everything, though it probably just held more technobabble nonsense. "Simple," Rian said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We land, find whatever these ancients were hiding, and get out before anyone else shows up to complicate things." "Ah, the sophisticated poke around until something kills us strategy," Maeve chimed in, her fingers drumming on her console as if daring the universe to throw another disaster their way. Always a crowd pleaser. Elia's voice crackled through the comms, sharing what little comfort she could offer. At least we're not getting shot at yet. Small victories. Yeah, let's cherish that while it lasts, Rian said, squinting at the unfamiliar landscape as they touched down. The ship's landing gear groaned like an old man standing up, but it held. Small victories indeed. The crew gathered their gear and disembarked, stepping onto Theta 9's surface with all the enthusiasm of prisoners on a forced march. The air was thick and dry, the kind that makes you feel like your lungs are lined with sandpaper. Always wanted to vacation on a giant litter box, Quint said, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare of the sun. Dreams really do come true. Keep dreaming. Maybe you'll find some shade, Rian replied, scanning the horizon for anything that didn't look like a death trap. So far, no luck. They made their way toward a cluster of ruins peeking out from the sands, relics of whatever paranoid architects had decided that hiding something here was a good idea. The structures were squat and blocky, designed with all the aesthetic appeal of a cement mixer. If this was the big secret, Rian was ready to submit a complaint. Maeve moved ahead, her eyes locked on a handheld scanner that beeped and whirred as if trying to match her growing impatience. "Anything interesting?" Rian asked, though he suspected the answer was a resounding no. "Unless you're a fan of dust and disappointment," Maeve said, shaking her head. "This place has been picked clean. Whatever was here, scavengers beat us to it." "Well, there's a shocker," Quint muttered, kicking at a rock that was probably more fossilized ancient sneeze than geological wonder. Another wild goose chase. Rian's gaze lingered on the ruins, sensing something just beneath the surface, like an itch he couldn't scratch. "There's got to be more than this," he insisted, unwilling to accept what seemed painfully obvious. "Nobody builds a decoy city and then leaves the real prize unguarded. Unless the prize is long gone," Elia said, a note of resignation in her voice. "Or it never existed in the first place." They continued to search, combing through the ruins with determination born more from stubbornness than any real hope of success. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shadows reminiscent of a bad day at the office, Rian finally called them back to the ship. "All right, pack it in," he said, trying to inject some levity into their collective disappointment. "Nothing more to see here, folks, unless you're into rocks." Quint sighed, his shoulders slumping as he pocketed his Rubik's Cube. Well, at least it wasn't a total loss. "We got a nice walk out of it. And a decent tan," Maeve added, though her smile was more a grimace. They filed back aboard the ship, leaving the mysteries of Theta 9 behind. As they lifted off, Rian couldn't help but feel like they were missing something. The nagging feeling nibbled at him like a particularly persistent mosquito. "Back to the colony, then?" Elia asked through the comms, her voice steady despite the setback. "Back to the colony," Rian confirmed, his thoughts already drifting to their next move or lack thereof. "We might not have found what we were looking for, but at least we're still in one piece. And that's the real treasure," Quint said, though the sarcasm couldn't totally mask his relief. The journey back was quiet, the kind of silence that fills the void when words are pointless. As they docked at the colony, the crew was greeted with the familiar sights and sounds of home, or whatever passed for it out here. "Feels good to be back," Maeve said, stretching like a cat who'd been napping in a sunbeam. "In a place where things don't actively try to kill you every 5 minutes. Except for the bureaucracy," Quint corrected, earning a chuckle from the group. Rian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey lift ever so slightly. "We've got work to do," he said, the resolve returning to his voice. "Even if we didn't find the answers, we learned enough about these ancients to bolster our defenses. Make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." "Always a silver lining," Maeve said, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard as she set to work on the colonist systems. Elia's face appeared on a nearby screen, her expression one of determined optimism. "We've been through worse," she said, her words a balm to their collective frustrations. "And we'll handle whatever comes our way next, together." "Yeah, together," Rian echoed, feeling the solidarity of their little group, the strength in their shared struggles. "Hell, We've survived worse odds with less. As the days passed, the colony continued to fortify its defenses, integrating the insights and technologies gleaned from their harrowing journey. The ancient drones and alien tech were reverse engineered, turning potential threats into invaluable resources. It was remarkable what a small team with a big problem could accomplish when they set their minds to it. Rian stood at the observation deck, watching the stars twinkle with a deceptive innocence. Space was vast and indifferent, but it was also a place of endless possibilities. He couldn't help but wonder what other secrets waited to be uncovered, and what cost they might demand. Thinking too hard might strain something, Maeve said, joining him with the easy camaraderie born of shared danger. You should try it sometime. Rian grinned, not taking his eyes off the stars. Just contemplating our place in the universe, you know, the usual. Ah, the classic existential crisis, she said, leaning against the rail. Can't say I blame you. We've seen enough to last a lifetime or at least a few therapy sessions. Yeah, Rian agreed, his tone touched with a hint of wistfulness. But it's not just about the mysteries, it's about us. What we've managed to do together. Maeve nodded, her gaze thoughtful. In a galaxy that wouldn't hesitate to chew us up and spit us out, we've made our own little corner. And that's worth all the wild goose chases, Rian said, turning to face her with a wry smile. Even when they lead us to a barren rock with more dust than answers, she chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Here's to more adventures like that, minus the dust if possible. As they stood there, their presence a small but defiant mark against the vast canvas of space, Rian felt a sense of contentment settle over him. They didn't have all the answers, and the threats they faced were far from over. But as long as they had each other, they'd find a way through, because in the end it wasn't just about surviving the universe. It was about making a place for themselves within it against all odds, and as far as Rian was concerned, that was the greatest adventure of all. Come on, Maeve said, nudging him away from the rail. There's still work to be done. The stars aren't going anywhere. With one last glance at the endless expanse, Rian followed her back inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they'd never be outmatched, not as long as they stuck together. And as the door closed behind them, sealing out the chill of the cosmos, Rian knew one thing for certain. The universe might be a harsh place, but it had nothing on the resilience of the human spirit.